My guest today is Therese Anne Fowler, who is the author of the New York Times bestseller, A Good Neighborhood. I absolutely love this book. Can't wait to talk to her about it. And she's also, in case her name is familiar to you, the author of Z, and she is also the author of A Well-Behaved Woman, and we're going to speak about those books as well. So they're all Book Reporter Bets on selections. Welcome, Therese. So nice to have you here.
Hi, Carol. I wish we were in the same room together.
I know, I really do. And
That was our plan.
That was our plan with you. I was going to be interviewing you in Tucson. But you know what's really funny is I realized I read a very early manuscript of this book last year before we went to Tucson.
That's right.
And we sat in some fabulous Mexican restaurant that I still drool over.
Yes.
And talked about it. But that was a year ago. So I have to tell you, I reread this past week to make sure I had all the details because it's such a special book. So how about if we start by you giving us a little overview of A Good Neighborhood?
Sure. So A Good Neighborhood is a contemporary novel that has to do with the conflict that arises between these two families, one Black family and one white family who are neighbors. And that conflict starts over this historic oak tree in the Black family's backyard that has been damaged by the new construction of the home that the white family buys in the adjoining lot. And then it's complicated a lot more by the developing romance between the two families' teenagers.
Right, and you realize right from the start there's some kind of attraction between them.
Right.
And you realize that this is going to make the entire situation rather fraught because what is going to happen as a result?
Yeah.
Your characters are so well drawn. And what did you do to develop them? Like, who's your first character, and where did it sort of go from there?
I wish I could remember exactly who came to mind first. It was probably Xavier.
Mm-hmm.
He's the teenage boy. He's biracial, and he's just this really sweet, sensitive soul who has a love of classical guitar music and has grown up with just his mother. And I don't know, how does an author ever come to figure out who their characters are? They just sort of arrive in your head, and as you figure out what their story is, you put the pieces together. But I mean, if I could quantify exactly how this is done, I could probably put it down in a book, writing advice and sell 1 million copies of that, but there is no real formula of how we do it.
Was he always playing classical guitar from the beginning, or was he,
No, he always was. And I'll tell you where that comes from. We talked about Z, you mentioned it in your intro. And when that novel was being developed for television, I was in a party where we just finished filming the pilot episode, and Tim Blake Nelson, who had directed that episode, had myself and my husband in a back room at this restaurant where we were just all talking about books. We weren't talking about the TV show at all. And Tim told me that his teenage son played classical guitar and was studying it formally at a high school in New York City, I think. And so just that idea that there could be teenagers right now who would love this particular sort of old-fashioned instrument, I don't know, it stuck with me. And so when Xavier came to mind, that was just always who he was.
And it's a very interesting plot point for him because it's something that's classic. It's something that's not, it says a lot about him also because it's like he's an old soul in a lot of ways.
Right, and he's so intense about his loves. And that was a really important thing to know about him early on.
Of what we were going to do. So the families are really different in terms of race and economic status and belief systems, but you're writing them, you don't make those characters cliched at all. They're fully drawn, really so well, which is impressive. How did you go about developing them? Did you have notes on a page of this is what Valerie is going to be, this is what Xavier is going to be?
That's so much more organized than the way I work. It's just a completely organic process. And so I don't know, I knew that Valerie was somebody who cared deeply about the environment, and so that led me to create her character as a professor of ecology and forestry. And then I knew that the family that was moving in behind them were more what we used to call yuppies. Remember that term? Yeah. And so, who might those people be? And so you kind of winnow down the possibilities based on where you think the story is going to go. But again, it's just a really organic process.
Well, I always think of them as nouveau riche as well. That's who
Nouveau
they were.
riche, yeah.
Yeah, it was, I really love because Brad sees himself as a celebrity. I mean, let's face it, the guy owns
Small scale, right?
an HVAC company, that he's on TV a lot, but it just shows what celebrity means these days. You can be a small celebrity and have a big in your head. So I
right.
that he was, just sitting there going, this is celebrity and this is what I'm doing. But celebrity is so accessible these days. I mean, anybody can become a celebrity right now. It's like,
he makes commercials, right, for his HVAC company, and he's just seen by people in his community as really popular and really outgoing. He's very public, and we have a lot of men like that in the South who, they're sort of good old boy types who come across as completely charming and very likable, as Brad seems to be. And one of the reasons I structured the book the way I did, and you'll probably get to that, but I want the reader to see Brad the way that the neighbors see Brad originally. And then as the story goes on, we get a little clearer about the other parts of his character.
Who he really is. Brad likes to take care of people, but in taking care of them, it means that everything is going his way. This is how Brad sees the world. And this is what he's going to do for his wife and what he's going to do for his daughters.
Right.
But it's really, he's seeing everything through his own lens and microscope.
Yeah, he's sort of the master of his universe. There's a level of narcissism that I think many of us can recognize in some of the public figures around us today. And certainly I had that in mind when I was thinking about who Brad was.
Yeah, and even Brad's car, his Maserati.
Yeah.
And he's always talking about how much everything costs. And when he first meets his neighbor, when he first meets Valerie, he's telling her about the pool and how expensive it is and the fence and all these things. And he's not understanding at all that he's kind of ruined her summer with noise. And
yeah, I mean, she's traumatized by the whole thing. And he's just like, well, it's all good now,
Aren't you glad we're here? And oh, by the way, I'm going to put this fence up. And do you need a gate between for us to get back and forth? And she's like, I can't even believe this guy. This is what he's caring about right now, So meanwhile, she's concerned with more than her son. She sees herself as part of a neighborhood. She sees herself as part of a bigger universe.
Valerie does, yeah.
And she's grooming her son to be a valued member of society, not just the neighborhood. And I think that she's been doing that since when he was young. And I think that was such an interesting way to be writing his character of she's just not looking at him graduating from high school. She's looking at who he's going to be in life.
Yeah, she's so much more conscientious about all of that because I think she's a Black woman living in a white person's world, really. She was married to a white man who dies when Xavier's just about a year old. She works in a field that is dominated by white people. And I think if you are Black in America today, based on the research that I've done listening to personal folks who live that reality all the time, it's not the same for someone who is a minority in our culture. And so, yeah, she's absolutely much more aware of who Xavier is as a child, who he might be able to become, and sort of how different it is for a child like him to grow up in the world and how careful he has to be about, being considered a Black man in America today is a fraught thing to be.
Yeah, and I think that she's constantly worried about his safety because she realizes in a situation how it could turn against him, as it does in this book. So, and I'm trying not to give anything away, which is really tough because
it is hard.
It's really tough. The American dream means something different to different people. And I think that, we hear about the American dream all the time. And these are two families with different points of view to find themselves next to each other. How is it that we continue to divide ourselves by race and class in this country, no matter how much people talk about not wanting to do this?
I don't know exactly what the answer to the why is. I mean, that's part of the reason that I wrote this book, is because I'm trying to figure that out, and I want all of us to try to figure that out. The neighborhood in the book is comprised of people who are very different classes, right? We have the folks like Valerie, who moved in a long time ago and live in a very modest home, and she's solidly middle class. And then we have people like Brad and his wife Julia, who are maybe not, you know, way upper class, but certainly better socioeconomic class. And the people in the neighborhood all think of themselves as reasonably progressive, you know. So we have Brad and Julia moving into this neighborhood that Brad might have thought was beneath him, except that now they're infilling these McMansions, you know, and so now it's an okay place for him to live. And he does not imagine himself as any kind of racist. He doesn't think that he is particularly worried about class because he's got his, you know. So I think that there's this unconscious behavior that we learn just from the society around us in terms of how we think about other people that just keeps getting perpetuated because maybe we don't step up to change when we see that things are wrong. And it's hard to do.
It's hard to do. And it's race is so central to the story. If the families had both been white or black, they wouldn't have been dealing with conflict in exactly the same way.
No, certainly not in that way. Right.
If it was, you know, just one thing or the other. But at one point, Valerie says that Juniper is too white. And I thought that was a really apropos line, because she's not just a white girl. She's got a lot of different super white values, as far as I think Valerie saw. So let's talk about what it means to be too white in Valerie's eyes.
Yeah, so, you know, Xavier, of course, his response to his mother saying this about Juniper is like, what a hypocritical thing to say. You were married to a white man. But Valerie's concern is that Juniper is not just white. She's white, and she's the child of a very conservative Christian mother, although Valerie, or rather Juniper's mother, Julia, comes to Christianity kind of a tool for improving her life and her daughter's life more than an ideology. But because of that, and because of Brad and the way he sees himself, this is what Valerie's getting at. You know, she wouldn't necessarily be against his seeing a white girl generally, but this particular one, the situation is much more prone to problems, which of course is what happens.
Which is exactly what ends up happening. Women's issues are just as important to the story as race. And I think that you handle that so well. The purity ball, which is one thing where Brad wants his daughter to remain a virgin until married, and there's a ceremony and all these kinds of things that is fraught with, you know, men overtaking what women's sexuality, men having women conform. So I thought it was such a strong piece, because her mom, Juniper's mom, was not, this is not her father. Brad is not her father.
Brad is not her father, right.
And as a result, to have allowed this man to have control over her daughter that way, I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, we should mention for people listening to us that, you know, Julia did not have a very advantageous upbringing, you know. So she was pregnant when she was a teenager. She had Juniper when she was not married to the father. She grew up in a mobile home, you know, in Eastern North Carolina. We talk about those folks as trailer trash. And so when she marries Brad, she's marrying up, and she seeks communion with this mega church when Juniper and she are just kind of getting involved with Brad to help sure that Juniper doesn't have the same kind of moral, loose morals that she herself had. So Julia is just as responsible for the Juniper getting involved in this purity pledge program as Brad. Brad kind of steps in saying, yeah, that's me. I'm the right guy for the job here, and I'm going to be the head of the household, and I'm going to ensure that my stepdaughter grows up to be, you know, a fine young woman. But Julia is absolutely along for the ride in that.
Yeah, because I think she's also seeing that anything that's going to keep her station in life to be what it wants to be, because she doesn't give up what she has at all.
She had a miserable, you know, she was job to job and having to worry about childcare and no money and no support and all of that. And so I think we can understand why once she does, I mean, she's not a social climber. She's just looking for some security. And now that she has it, she wants to keep it.
Yeah, and control is a very big issue throughout the book. Power and control. Who has the power? Who has the control? Who's trying to get the control? Who's trying
Yeah,
to have the power?
that's
And I
right.
just thought, what drew you, like those topics there, you do such a good job of balancing them. When you were writing, were you doing that push pull back and forth, or am I overanalyzing?
No, no, I mean that's sort of what we do when we build a plot, right? So I don't remember which writer it was that I first read this, but someone said, put your characters in a tree and then throw rocks at them. So
Mhm.
that's sort of what we're doing here. We're saying, you know, who has the control at the moment? Well, it seems like maybe Brad does, you know, because of the situation and his power in the community. But then Valerie has a claim that maybe will help her regain power. And in the meantime, the kids are sort of trying to have power over their own fates, even though they know that their parents are not going to approve of the relationship. So yeah, it's really murky, and I think it's just a process of thinking about what are the possible outcomes, good and bad, and the story tells you where it's going to go ultimately.
Yeah, did you work on balancing everything, or was it organic as you started writing? Did you ever
No,
say?
I'm not, I'm very analytic, like in my head, but I don't chart things out. I
Mhm.
just sort of feel my way through the story, and I try to make things as plausible as I can do. And then, of course, I have people read to tell me whether they think I'm doing it right or not. So there were some places where I might have veered a little too much in one direction or another. Then my early readers, including my husband and my agent, and then eventually my editor, you know, we kind of think more closely about all of that and do the fine tuning.
Yeah, just do a little bit of pulling back.
Yeah,
What you're doing is also your storytelling includes a narrator that's the neighborhood of
right.
what's happening. And they're giving you this outside, bigger look besides what you're just hearing from the characters. So let's talk about the character of the neighborhood telling, or the outsider telling the story of what's going on here.
Yeah, it's a really rarely used style of narration because it doesn't fit very many stories.
Mhm.
It works really nicely for a story like this because this is kind of a classic tragedy where the best point of view is one that it's not like you're reading the book to find out like what happened. You sort of know right up front what happened, but you don't know why, and you don't know to whom. So that's kind of what this narration does. Is it opens up by saying, you know, we, meaning the neighborhood, witness these events, and we need to tell you this story because it's a kind of cautionary tale. So this point of view is terrific for that. It gives you the intimacy of like first person, where you know, right, you're right in with the characters, but also allows some distance so that you have that broader view of the events too.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read Saint X by Alexis
I
Shakin.
haven't read that
Yeah.
yet.
And it's interesting because Alexis uses, I guess it's 7 or 9 other characters that
Wow.
fill in pieces along the way. And
Uh-huh.
if, so as a result, you'll just hear somebody talking and telling their side of the story, and then they're
Interesting.
out. So yeah, I highly recommend just taking a look at it because I think you'd enjoy it. Because just seeing how you use the neighborhood, I was thinking the same thing when I was seeing this. So there's a tree that's central to the story. There's a reason that there's a leaf on the front of the book. And you do some very beautiful descriptions of nature. There's something very grounded in having the tree involved. Was the tree an early part of the story?
The tree was the original like seed for the story. Actually, I had a tree in my backyard that was essentially the tree that is in this book, and that tree had its root structure compromised by construction. In my case, it was next door, not the house behind, but the builder who was building on that lot next to mine ran the driveway all the way down the property line, like the whole way, and then put the garage in the back. And so I was watching my own tree show signs of disruption, if not death. And I had a great lot of anxiety about that. So that's really where this all started. Between that and the state of the world in 2018, when I was writing the book, a lot to be anxious about.
Well, we had neighbors who right next door to us who decided to put in a lawn at some point and take down all the trees.
Oh no.
And they didn't really think this whole thing through because what happened is the root structure of the trees that remain behind were all damaged
Yeah.
because the land was now either higher or lower. I can't remember. So I remember the house was on the market at one point, and my husband and I walked over, and we just were gonna just see the house, do our walkthrough, and we turn around and we look, and he goes, "Look at all the dead trees in this yard," and there must have been 8 or 10, and
Yeah.
I was like, "Wait a second, are any of those going to fall onto our property?" And we got somebody to come in and say, no, they would probably go this way. And the people ended up taking down these trees later. But I think I was seeing this so personally, reading the book, because you realize you can just upset the ecosystem in such a way that
Yeah.
you can destroy exactly, what's there, even though you think it's still going to be okay.
And somebody like your neighbor probably wasn't aware of what the effect was going to be on those other trees. But, in the case of where I was living when I wrote the book, and lots of places have this going on now, the builders and the developers, they know that those trees are going to die. And either they take them all out, which is what happens, for Julia and Brad in the book, all the trees are taken off that lot, or they leave them and say, well, it won't be my problem later when the homeowner has to take them out. So I saw a lot of that happening in my neighborhood too.
Yeah, and it's just such a shame because we live in a huge wooded area, and though they have rules of how many trees you can take down, nobody seems to pay attention to this. Like, oh, look at it. Like, how are you taking down 20 trees, to be doing this? And of course, builders don't want to build around trees because it's hard to do. So, they're not interested in doing that as well. But the tree was just, it was such a big thing for me, just after having walked over and seen all those dead trees in our neighbor's property. I'm like, oh, I know exactly what that looks like.
Right.
So this is called a good neighborhood. And I love that, because when people are moving into a neighborhood they always want to say they're moving into a good neighborhood. Nobody wants to move into a bad neighborhood.
No, right. You usually don't.
And we're saying we're moving into this good neighborhood. And the neighbors have opinions here. It's, does the conflict they reframe, does this reframe the reputation of the neighborhood for what's going on, but what ends up happening? Does this remain a good neighborhood?
Well, I think that would depend on who you ask, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, everybody has opinions, but they also, I think the opening paragraph of the book says, we never wanted to take sides. And that is the position that most of these neighbors maintain throughout. Nobody wants conflict. We've got enough conflict happening in the world around us. And when Valerie is pointing out to her good friend that she thinks the tree is dying and she's interested in talking to a lawyer about maybe filing a lawsuit, her friend is just like, I'm just so tired of, things being, the conflicts, I don't want more of this. But Valerie's like, well, if we don't step up, then this just keeps happening.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where the tension remains for the neighbors as this story unfolds too. And they don't know everything that's going on right at that moment either. Some of it they only learn after the fact.
Yeah.
But and it points out how difficult it is to insert ourselves into other people's lives, even if we see things going wrong, or if we know that something needs to be said, but who's going to say it? Mm-hmm. It's not as easy as we would like it to be.
No, and does anyone want to say to Valerie, back off? Well, no, that's what she really believes. But you can imagine the conversation going across dinner tables around town of, is this worth it, of what she's doing, and where does it matter? And it really shows she has real principles that she's not willing to compromise. And I think she's a very strongly principled person, partially because of what she's been through in her own life.
Sure. No, that's right.
The novel is, the ending, first of all, is super powerful, hauntingly so. Did you know the ending from the start?
Almost. So, it opens with the neighbors telling us that there was a funeral. Mm-hmm. I didn't know whose funeral it was, right? And I probably had written 2/3 of the book. I knew, of course, it could be, any of these characters, but who is it? And the story eventually told me, but I didn't know for a very long time that was going to be the ending.
Yeah, it's such a powerful ending, because it really haunts you, because I'm sitting there and I'm looking and I'm like, wait a second, this was driving this way the whole time. And you don't feel like it could have ended a different way. You feel like that's the way the story was meant to go. I definitely.
Right. That's what I mean by the story sort of tells the author eventually what the ending ought to be. Now that doesn't mean that every author pays attention to what the story tells them, right? We've read enough books where we read the ending and go, wait.
Exactly. The novel's set over a very brief amount of time. It's not years. It's
No,
not.
just a few weeks.
Yeah, and the action thus is propulsive as you read it. How long did it take you to write it?
I had a draft of this book done in about 5 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
which was crazy fast, but it was really all I was doing. And I was just so taken with needing to express needing to do something with all this anxiety that I had. And, as you know, and I'm sure we're going to talk about, I was writing historical based novels before this.
Mm-hmm.
And I really thought that's what I was going to do again. But this one just grabbed me. And so I just got up and I was at the keyboard, 2,000-3,000 words every day until I had a draft done. And my husband was like, "What are you even doing?" And I thought, I don't know. It's just in my head and I have to get it out. It was a really interesting experience.
I think that I can see, I think we talked about that last year when I saw you too, is how quickly you wrote it.
Yeah.
And I think that that gives the story the immediacy that we're all seeing with it as well, because you can tell that it was something you were constantly doing your feelings. And it wasn't like you were overthinking. It was the story was coming through. And I think that a lot of times in writing, some things seem so belabored that you're like, oh my gosh, that could have been so much faster. This is fast.
Right.
This is fast.
Just get to the point, right? It does get to the point. This book does.
Get to the point very quickly, very, very quickly. So the book is a new direction for you, but there's a look at class in your earlier novels as well.
Yeah.
In both of your earlier books. And I found that was so interesting because they were historical novels looking at Zelda, Fitzgerald, and then looking at Alva Vanderbilt. And you actually, both of those women were very strong characters. Mm-hmm. They were very, strong women with a real passion about life and things that matter to them. In your book about Ava, or what is it, Alva? And your book about Alva, what you did was she had a very unconventional life. So I feel like this book was sort of a natural progression in some ways to me after that, because she was so out, on her own plane.
We have, if we have a through line in all of these books, is that I'm really interested in strong women who have fascinating stories. They are not necessarily people who do everything right. Certainly they make mistakes. They're flawed characters, but whether I make them up or whether I find them in history, I think that is just something that really appeals to me. Possibly I see some of myself in those unusual journeys since I've had one of my own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just think, like, when I was reading, I was thinking back on these strong characters that you've had such a passion about before. And I said, I think that enabled you to actually see, well, okay, this is how to do this character as well, a modern character.
Yeah, yeah.
You're putting that together as well. So it didn't take you that long to write it, and it did come to you more quickly. You've always pushed yourself in with your writing, though, and that's the one thing I've always admired about you. Is there are actually 3 novels that I read of yours before the 2 historicals. I mean, I've been a long time reader of your work.
You have been along since the beginning, Carol.
I know, and I still think about Souvenir. And these books are out of print, but you can buy them places. The first 3 novels that you wrote, and I think that what you did there that I saw again in this book is you wrote teen life really well. You really understood the teens or the young people in those earlier books. And I saw that strong character writing once again here. Good. And is that something that you saw as well?
I just write the character, whoever it is. But I still remember what it felt like to be a teenager, so that helps. And then I raised a pair of boys who lived through their teen years with them, so that helps too. But I don't know that there's that much difference between writing young characters and older characters. And I write characters who are much older than I am sometimes too, because you just have to do like what method actors do, right? You just have to get into the headspace of who that character is. Mm-hmm. But, the teen years, they don't last very long for us, but boy, do they make a big impression. right?
Big impression. I mean,
Some people are still living their teen years, 20 years later, right?
yeah, some people have not grown through those. But I think that Juniper is going to be so changed by her teen years and what ended up happening. And her sister will as well. And I think that that's because her sister is much younger and she
Right.
sees things through these little kid eyes. But by the same token, the ramifications of what happens, which we're not going to share with these families at this point, will have a lasting effect on both of those girls.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that with Lily, who's only 7,
Mhm.
but there's some interesting parallels to the drama that Juniper goes through when she's very young, and now what Lily has to go through too. Good
Exactly.
point, Carol.
Yeah, and Juniper, yeah, I don't know. I was just very into the age difference between the characters and the way Lily sees life, just sees life. Everything's
It's
going
so easy
on.
for her.
But every once in a while, she comes out with these zingers, and she's actually seeing the whole big picture, though everybody's kind of underestimating her of what's going on.
I really love her as a character. Yeah.
Yeah. She's really terrific. Once again, I'm drawing another parallel with Saint X because in it, the two sisters are that far apart in age. The
Oh,
younger one is about 7 or 8 in the book, and the sister is 19. And
okay.
once again, I'm always like looking for, gee, what am I seeing that I would recommend for readers of, if you want to sit there and look at conflict, if you wanted to look at what's going on for these two people, and you realize later on, Lily is going to have a lot of questions about her sister's life and
Absolutely.
what ended up happening then.
Yeah.
She was
Well,
on
there's a spin-off for us right there.
a spinoff. Okay, there. We booked it this afternoon, and there's plenty of time to write it now.
Yeah, there is.
Just like, da 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 da. Okay, there's an absolute stunning cover, and I'm gonna just try and pull this in a little bit closer because the stunning cover on this book, the way the light plays off of it, etc. Was this always the cover? Was this the direction for the cover?
As far as I know, they didn't show me anything else, but Olga Gerlich did this cover. She also did the cover for Z, and I think she's just brilliant. She recognized that this is a simple story with a lot of subtlety to it. And so if you look really close at the way the title is printed on there, the leaf is sort of degrading, and some of the letters on the title are degrading. So things are not as perfect and beautiful as they seem.
Right. I just saw, I remember you sending me the cover and I'm saying, wow, that is absolutely perfect for the book. And the way the light bounces off of it, it says a lot. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's gorgeous.
So I refreshed myself also listening to this book on audio, and the audio is extremely well done. And it was funny because a couple of weeks ago, I knew I wanted to talk to you, and I was like, wait a second, I really have to remember this book, and I have a lot of time.
Right.
So I ended up with a lot more time the last couple of weeks, but at that time, so I immediately reached out to your publisher and got an early, audio sample and started listening. And I just found the audio is so well done. Did you have a hand in the audio?
I did, actually. So Ella Turen is the name of the actress who reads. She reads the whole book. She was someone that was suggested to me by the folks at Macmillan Audio. I didn't know her work. She has not done a lot of audio prior to this, but she's an activist and an actress and a writer and just a really fascinating, interesting woman. So as soon as I heard the audio clips that they sent me to say, what do we think? Do we want Ella to do the whole book? I said, absolutely. She just has that, you trust her tone.
Mm-hmm.
She has a warm voice. She's knowledgeable. Some narrators, they get in the way of the story, and she doesn't do that at all. So I'm glad to hear that you think that is well done.
Yeah, and at the end of the podcast, we're shooting this at both video and podcast. At the end of the podcast, we're going to have a sample of the audio.
Oh,
I've
cool.
already gotten it pulled so that we'll be able to share that so people can understand what we're talking about. And I just find that audio is so wonderful to be able to experience. It's because I don't always have time to read everything. Right. So a lot of times I'm in the car, I'm walking, I'm whatever, to try to make sure I'm getting the full gist of the book to be able to share with the readers.
Very good. Yeah, I do the same thing.
Yeah, it's a nice experience. So you listen to audiobooks regularly? Do you usually do that?
Well, I don't spend as much time in my car as you do, but I especially now I can only get out and just walk around, can't go anywhere, right? I like to listen to audiobooks when I'm hiking or just cleaning house, things like that. I still prefer the printed version. I don't read on e-readers. I like the real book. I like to smell the real book. I like to know where I am in the story, right? But yeah, audiobooks I think are a terrific alternative.
The one thing, an audiobook has to be really good because I'm a very fast reader. I read very quickly. I can't say I read every word. The authors would want me to say I read every word. I don't read every word. I actually took a speed reading class when I was in like 7th grade because my mother thought that would be good for high school. And when I was brought in, they did this prior test and they said, well, when did she complete the course? Because I had already was like, when you finish the class.
Well, you talk fast too, so I'm not surprised that you read fast.
Yeah, you read fast. But when listening to audio, sometimes I feel like I have to ramp up the speed a little bit because they're slow.
Yeah.
Either that or what you can do with digital, but either that or sometimes I'm hearing things in the book that I might have missed if I wasn't doing that.
Yes. No, and I know a number of authors now who are writing a little bit differently.
Because of audio being so big, I'm hearing a lot of authors are now reading their books aloud to themselves at the end to see if the cadence is right, to see if they've used the same word too many times. Last week, Harlan Coben said that's one of the worst days of his life as he goes down and sits and reads the entire book to himself.
Oh,
but
no.
as a very important exercise. Do you do that? Do you read the book to yourself?
I do that now. I didn't used to do that, but it's actually a really great thing for people to do regardless of whether the book's going to be in audio. But because you do recognize things with your ears that you don't notice with your eyes, it's really important actually to do it. Mm-hmm.
There's a book that will remain nameless that I've read recently that I actually missed as something that I think if I was reading, I would have caught it, and my ears completely deceived me, and I did not put these two characters together. And I remember I was driving on the New Jersey Turnpike and I was like, how did I miss that? Like how? And I wrote the author and she said, you're not the first person that has said it. And it's usually the audio listeners who are saying it.
That's so interesting, right? We get something different when we listen versus when we read.
A totally different experience. It was very, very funny. So book clubs. First of all, this was selected as a Barnes & Noble book club selection. Of course, everything's up in the air about how we're going to discuss this book at this point. It will be very virtual with everybody. You might be with the whole country on one big Zoom,
That would be interesting.
Exactly. But I think that this is going to be a book, and we're talking about it on Reading Group Guides, as a book that you really want to sit down and discuss with people when you finish, and you want to discuss the ramifications. Have you started to hear from people, even though the book's only out a couple of weeks, of people saying, I could see reading this with my book club?
Oh, absolutely. And it was happening well ahead of publication because we had so many advanced copies out there. So I occasionally would pop into Goodreads and see what people are saying about the book. And there was a lot of like, oh my gosh, I need somebody to talk to about this. I can't wait for this book to be out so that we can have a conversation. And I'm seeing that people tag me on Instagram a lot, like this past 2 weeks, like, oh, well, people are reading the book and they have things to say.
They have things to say and they have things to talk about. And I would be really interested to see if different parts of the country react differently to the book as well. It's like, I'm not sure. I don't know. The story is so deep. Actually, my book club, I think two book clubs. I'm in one with people in my neighborhood and I'm on with a bunch of young moms. The Young Moms Book Club and I were supposed to meet last week, and we were going to be talking about the Daisy Jones and the Six. Mm-hmm. Well, everyone's now homeschooling their children, which is a priority. So everyone has become a teacher and they're doing like lesson plans and stuff. So we're still going to try and do that. And I think we're going to use something like Zoom to do it. So we can at least, be able to talk about the books at some point.
No, we just did a Zoom cocktail hour with friends last night.
Oh, how fun. How fun. Yeah. I think that people are starving for some kind of companionship in everything that's going on with these days of social distancing.
We all love our families, but we don't necessarily want to be with them all day, every day.
I haven't been out since a week ago Monday. And before that, I hadn't been out since a week ago, the Wednesday before. I wasn't feeling well. And I was like, I'm just not going to push this. And literally last Monday, I ran into the office to pick up some mail, grab some books, and walked out. And that has been the extent of leaving the house. Granted, I have a great pile of books because I wanted to be able to come home and talk about them. But it's been this very interesting experience. And I said, I'm just really glad that we're not on top of each other in this house because it would not go well,
Yes, I was thinking about that. People have kids at home. Oh my gosh,
I know. I can't even picture. One of my friends said, okay, that we are flunking homeschooling and it's perfectly okay. Everyone's
Yes.
going to get an F and I don't really care anymore. Like, I just
I-
can't do this.
People should just let themselves off the hook.
I know. And that's what I think a lot of people are saying at this point. There's so much going on. Just cut yourself a break. If you want to go sit and have your kids go read a book, go read a book. And everything is going to be fine. It's not going to be fine immediately. It's going to be, and have them look back on this as not a negative experience of mom screaming, sit and do your
Right.
homework,
Right.
but instead something that you were able to do. So, yeah, are you working on something new at this point?
I'm wildly distracted from the thing that I've been working on, but yes, I do have something new underway. I'm not going to say much more about it.
My rule is I never ask. But can you write okay, when there's so much going on like this, that there's so much, can you actually say, okay, I'm just going to go and write and drop into a zone, or is this just so crazy that you find it impossible to do?
I think I'm going to be able to get into the mindset of working. I haven't been able to, just the last couple of weeks as my book tour was sort of, imploding one day ahead of where I was every day.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big distraction because I had spent so much time getting ready for book tour. And I think I did 2 events out of 25 or something like that.
Wow.
It's hard. But I'm going to put all that behind me, and I'm not going to read the news all day, every day. And somebody said Shakespeare wrote, 2 of his best works during the plague, so writers, we really have a standard to live up to there.
You really have a standard to live up to. And you know what I also find is that right now, once we get through, okay, how are we going to get food? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? There's going to come a time where it's just going to be like the new normal for a while. Yeah. And how do you adjust to the new normal? And I, last week was so busy that my office is a complete mess, and I'm really, really dying to clean my office. And I said, this may be the opportunity I've really been looking for.
Yes. We'll have lots of clean closets and, rearranged refrigerators and all of that.
Yeah, it's all the stuff that when you're really stuck home, it's like I have time to do. But last week was just so busy because I was doing things like trying to schedule this interview, trying to get, and really because I feel so strongly about the authors who do have books out right now and trying to be able to support them. It's like, okay, how can we do this? And we figured out you could do this thing, these interviews on Zoom. I'm like, okay, there's the answer. We're done.
I'm glad that you did.
Yeah. So this has been such a pleasure talking to you. I wish you such success with the book. I can't wait to hear more people reacting to it. I know we ran a great review last week, and I put my bets on commentary up this week, and I'm looking forward to the readers seeing that. And then our readers, as you read this book, I would love to hear from you and, share what's going on, because I just think it's an important book. And at the same time, I think it's something that it's a big leap forward in your career, and I want to make sure we celebrate it.
Well, thank you, Carol. I appreciate it so much.
Well, thanks for joining us. And everyone, we'll be back to you with another Book Reporter Talks to interview soon, direct from my dining room. Okay, talk to you soon, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Carol. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.